A castle's shadow could stop an advancing army in its tracks. This is the power of medieval military architecture, a subject where every stone tells a story of survival. By the end of this journey, you will understand the 30 specific techniques that made these fortresses nearly impossible to conquer. We will explore why a simple trench was as vital as a legion of soldiers, and how a slanted wall could change the fate of kingdoms. From the earliest earthworks to the brilliant concentric designs, we are about to decode the strategic minds of the builders who revolutionized warfare. What do you believe was the single greatest innovation that allowed a handful of defenders to withstand an army for months on end? A wooden palisade could be set ablaze with a single flaming arrow. This was the fundamental weakness of the earliest medieval strongholds, known as mottes and baileys. A lord would command his people to dig a deep ditch, piling the earth high into a steep mound called a motte. At its summit, they erected a wooden tower and surrounded the entire complex with a wooden fence, the bailey, protecting the workshops, animals, and people below. It was a formidable display of power for its time, but it was fundamentally temporary. The true turning point arrived not with a sudden change, but with the slow, patient laying of stone upon stone. Beginning around the 11th century, nobles started replacing their vulnerable wooden towers with massive stone keeps. This was not about building a grander home, it was about building a legacy. A stone fortress could not be burned. It could resist battering rams and shrug off the harsh seasons. It projected an image of unshakable authority that was literally set in stone. This shift from earth and timber to rock and mortar was the first and most critical innovation. It transformed a local lord's stronghold into a lasting symbol of control, capable of enduring a prolonged siege and securing a dynasty. And it all began with the very first technique on our list, the humble yet mighty ditch and bank. That ditch was more than just a hole, it was a carefully calculated trap. Before a single stone was laid for a mighty keep, the ground itself was weaponized. This first technique, the Strategic Dry Moat, formed a stark and empty barrier that an enemy army had to solve before even thinking about scaling the walls. Imagine an army emerging from the woods, their siege towers ready, only to be halted by a vast man-made canyon. This trench forced soldiers to descend into a vulnerable low position and then struggle to climb the other side, all while archers on the walls above targeted them with ease. The genius of this design was its efficiency. The earth dug out to create this formidable ditch was not wasted. It was piled up to form the high motte for a tower, or to build a steep inner slope called a berm, making the main walls even taller and harder to assault. This was a perfect cycle of defense, where the act of digging the moat directly strengthened the castle's core structure. It turned the landscape into an ally, proving that a fortress's strength could be measured by the emptiness surrounding it. And while this dry moat was a formidable obstacle, builders soon realized they could make this first line of defense even more daunting by filling that void with water. But water transformed that ditch into an insurmountable nightmare. The water-filled moat was not merely a wet trench, it was a living, breathing part of the castle's defense. Picture a wide, murky channel, its dark surface perfectly reflecting the towering stone walls, creating a psychological barrier of sheer intimidation. Any attacker knew those depths could hide sharpened stakes, while the water itself made the walls impossible to reach with ladders or battering rams. Crossing this aquatic obstacle required building complex pontoon bridges or filling sections with earth, back-breaking work performed under a constant, deadly rain of arrows from the battlements above. What made the moat truly brilliant was its self-sufficiency. Often fed by a diverted river or natural spring, it provided a sustainable defense that also improved the castle's sanitation and could even be stocked with fish for a fresh food supply. This was a perfect fusion of military necessity and environmental adaptation, creating a feature that was as elegantly practical as it was fearsome. The moat's genius was its layered threat, a principle that would soon be replicated on a grand scale in the very walls it protected. And it is to that primary barrier, the mighty curtain wall, that our attention must now turn. That unbroken expanse of stone was the fortress's primary shield, a continuous barrier known as the curtain wall. These walls were not thin partitions, they were colossal structures, often thicker than 3 men lying head to foot. Their immense mass was their greatest asset, engineered to withstand the relentless pounding of siege engines. A catapult stone might chip the surface, but it could not shatter the wall's core. The great height served a dual purpose. It forced attackers to carry impossibly long and heavy ladders, and it gave the defenders atop the wall a commanding view, turning them into hunters looking down on their prey. Clever builders often gave these walls a subtle slope, a battered base that widened at the bottom. This angled profile was a masterstroke, causing incoming projectiles to glance off harmlessly and making the initial climb for any attacker far more treacherous. The curtain wall was the ultimate expression of perimeter defense, a lesson in sheer, stubborn resilience. Its entire purpose was to be an unconquerable skin, but a wall is only as strong as the soldiers who defend it. Those soldiers needed a place to stand and fight, a dedicated path that transformed the barrier from a passive shell into an active battlefield. This need gave rise to the Wallwalk, the vital thoroughfare that crowned the mighty curtain. High upon the curtain wall, that protected pathway was the castle's lifeblood. This was the Wallwalk, a narrow road in the sky that let defenders race to any threatened point along the perimeter. It transformed the top of the wall from a simple ledge into a dedicated combat platform, a superhighway for soldiers and communication. But a soldier standing in the open is a target. This is where the castle's iconic silhouette came into play, the rhythmic pattern of high stone teeth and low gaps known as crenellations. Each high section, the merlon, was a solid shield of stone where a defender could stand completely protected. The low gap beside it, the embrasure, was his firing port. An archer could step forward, loose an arrow through the embrasure, and then step back into the safety of the merlon to reload, a simple, brutal dance that made him nearly invulnerable to return fire from below. This brilliant alternating design created a continuous field of fire along the entire wall. It meant that at any given moment, a storm of projectiles could pour down on attackers, with no safe blind spots for them to exploit. The Wallwalk and Crenellations worked in perfect harmony, turning a static stone barrier into a dynamic, responsive, and overwhelmingly lethal instrument of war. That iconic jagged skyline was not just for show, it was the visible heartbeat of a fortress ready for a fight. Yet for all its power, this high wall had a vulnerability, a blind spot directly at its feet where a determined enemy could gather unseen. To solve this, builders had to look down, creating a deadly overhang that would change the nature of close-quarters combat forever. That blind spot at the base of the wall was now a death trap, thanks to the stone jaws of the Machicolation. Projecting out from the top of the wall, these stone galleries with open holes in their floors allowed defenders to stand directly over the heads of their enemies. Imagine the terror of a soldier finally reaching the wall, thinking he was safe from the archers above, only to see a grim face peering down from a stone cage overhead. Through those openings, defenders could rain down an endless hell of heavy rocks, boiling water, or even hot sand that would seep through armor, causing unbearable pain. This was the ultimate answer to the problem of dead ground, the area right at the foot of the wall that was once a safe haven. Machicolations turned the castle's greatest structural weakness into a devastating killing ground, demonstrating a profound shift in thinking toward three-dimensional warfare. Often ornately decorated with carved stonework, these projections were both a terrifying functional feature and a stark statement of the castle's advanced defensive capabilities. They screamed to any attacker that there was no safe place, not even when you were pressed against the very stones you sought to breach. This brilliant principle of projecting defense outward, of reaching beyond the wall's face to dominate the space around it, would soon be applied on a much grander scale. It leads us directly to an even more aggressive and defining structure, the mighty tower. These flanking towers fundamentally broke the castle's straight lines. Jutting out boldly from the curtain wall, they were not just lookouts, they were aggressive stone fists clenched against any assault. Their primary purpose was to unleash flanking fire, a devastating tactical innovation. Before their invention, an attacker could press against the base of a long, flat wall with relative impunity, shielded from the archers directly above. But with a flanking tower watching over the wall, that same attacker was now exposed to a deadly hail of arrows from the side. He was caught in a lethal crossfire, with missiles coming from his front and his flank, turning the entire area before the wall into a perfectly designed killing zone. The strategic placement of these towers was a mathematical exercise in death, spaced so that the field of fire from one tower perfectly overlapped with the next, leaving no safe corridor along the wall's face. Their evolution in shape, from vulnerable squares to formidable rounds or D-shaped profiles, was a direct response to the power of siege engines. A square corner was a magnet for catapult stones, which could shatter the masonry and collapse the entire structure. A curved surface, however, presented a glancing blow, causing projectiles to skid off harmlessly. This simple geometric change massively increased a tower's survivability. Furthermore, each tower acted as an independent fortress. If invaders somehow breached the wall between two towers, they would find themselves trapped in a narrow courtyard, surrounded on three sides by defenders shooting down from the tower walls. This compartmentalization meant a breach was no longer a catastrophic failure, but merely a localized problem that could be contained and countered. The flanking tower turned a simple barrier into a collaborative, three-dimensional web of interlocking defenses. This relentless evolution in overcoming vulnerability finds its ultimate test at the castle's main entrance. The gateway was the castle's necessary weak point, a gaping hole in its armored skin that demanded an architectural solution of pure genius. The castle's main gate stood as its greatest paradox, a necessary opening that became its most lethal point. This was no simple doorway. It was the formidable gatehouse, an architectural masterpiece of controlled chaos. Its purpose was not to welcome but to channel, confuse, and ultimately destroy. Imagine an invading force, having survived the moat and the arrow fire, finally battering down the outer doors only to find their victory was a carefully orchestrated illusion. They were now trapped in a narrow stone throat, a passageway designed as a death trap. Their first obstacle was often a sharp 90-degree turn, a simple design that shattered the momentum of a charge and exposed every soldier's unshielded right side to waiting archers. As they pressed forward, the true horror began. From murder holes in the ceiling above, defenders would rain down a torrent of rocks, boiling water, and quicklime. Then, with a deafening crash, a heavy iron or wooden grill, the Portcullis, would slam down behind them, cutting off their retreat. Another would often drop in front, sealing them in a stone coffin. This was the killing zone, an enclosed courtyard where invaders were trapped and annihilated from all sides, with defenders shooting down from the walls and towers that surrounded them. The gatehouse was a fortress within a fortress, a psychological masterpiece that intimidated with its obvious strength and terrified with its hidden dangers. To breach it, an attacker had to fight through layer after layer of defense just to get inside the outer wall. And the final guardian of this deadly passage was often a feature that moved directly over the entrance, a heavy defensive grid that could be raised or lowered in an instant. That heavy iron grille was the gatehouse's final word. The Portcullis, a massive lattice of wood and iron often tipped with wicked spikes, hung poised in its stone channel like a guillotine waiting to fall. At the first sign of a serious breach, a guard in the chamber above would release the mechanism, and with a thunderous crash, this formidable barrier would slam down, sealing the passage in an instant. It was the ultimate emergency stop, a rapid response defense that could cut an invading force in two, trapping the front ranks inside the killing zone while isolating those still outside. Its clever crisscross design was not just for strength, it was a one-way shield. Defenders could thrust their spears through the gaps or fire crossbows from behind its relative safety, turning the barrier itself into an offensive weapon. Some of the most formidable castles employed 2 or even 3 portcullises in a row. An attacker who miraculously survived the first deafening drop would have to face another, and then another, each successive crash draining their courage and compounding the chaos. The sound of that iron gate hitting the stone floor was more than just noise. It was the definitive slam of a trap closing shut. But while the portcullis dealt in broad, crushing force, the castle's most intimate and terrifying defenses were far more precise, delivered through small, dark openings that looked innocuous until it was too late. Those narrow vertical openings transformed a solid wall into a shielded weapons platform. The arrow slit, or embrasure, was a masterpiece of military optics, a tiny window that gave the defender a panoramic view while offering the attacker a target no wider than a man's finger. Its brilliance lay in the subtle shaping of the stone. From the outside, it appeared as a mere dark line, a nearly impossible mark for an enemy archer to hit. But step inside the wall and the space dramatically opened up. The sides of the slit were splayed inward, creating a small, sheltered alcove where a defender could stand, move, and aim his bow with ease. This design granted him a field of fire spanning nearly 180 degrees, allowing a single archer to command a vast swath of the battlefield from complete safety. The evolution of this simple slit reveals the relentless push for greater efficiency. For crossbowmen who needed to track a moving target, the crosslet was developed. This was an arrow slit with a short horizontal cut added near the bottom, forming a stone cross. A crossbowman could rest his weapon in this notch, swiveling it smoothly to follow a knight on horseback without losing his aim or his protection. This constant refinement turned the castle wall into a living, breathing entity, its stone skin pierced by hundreds of watchful eyes, each one capable of spitting sudden death. The arrow slit is the ultimate symbol of the medieval defensive ethos, maximizing harm to the enemy while minimizing risk to oneself. And just as these slits protected the men launching small projectiles, a far more powerful artillery platform was being developed to house the siege engines that could answer an enemy's own heavy weapons. The Barbican was the castle's final warning before the gatehouse. This advanced outerwork was a self-contained fortress built beyond the main walls, its sole purpose to protect the castle's most vulnerable point. It forced any attacking army to run a terrifying gauntlet before they even saw the main gate up close. Imagine a narrow, walled passage extending out from the castle, channeling hundreds of soldiers into a tight, exposed corridor. In this confined space, their numerical advantage vanished, their formations shattered into a disordered mob. From the high walls of the Barbican itself and from the main battlements behind it, defenders unleashed a continuous storm of arrows and stones. This outer stronghold served as a tactical filter, grinding down the enemy's front lines and testing their morale long before they reached the true prize. It also created a vital killing zone that kept powerful siege towers and battering rams at a distance, preventing them from ever getting close enough to threaten the main gatehouse directly. The Barbican was a statement of cold, calculated strategy. It declared that the real battle would not begin at the castle walls, but dozens of yards earlier, in a place designed solely for slaughter. This principle of pushing the defense outward, of controlling the entire approach to the fortress, would redefine the very shape of medieval warfare. That sharp right-angle turn in the gateway was a masterstroke of simple geometry. Known as the bent entrance, this design solved a massive problem with an elegantly simple solution. A battering ram, that iconic tool of siege warfare, was a linear weapon. It needed a long, straight run to build up the destructive momentum required to splinter a gate. By forcing the entrance passage into a 90-degree turn, castle architects rendered the ram completely useless. An army could not charge a ram around a corner. This single feature neutralized one of the most potent offensive weapons before the fight even began, but the brilliance of the bent entrance did not stop there. It also forced invading infantry to abandon their formation. Instead of a roaring tide of soldiers flooding into the courtyard, they were reduced to a slow, single-file trickle. Each man had to round the corner alone, his shield held in front of him, completely exposing his unarmored right side to the waiting defenders. This was not just a physical barrier, it was a psychological gauntlet. The confident charge of a moment before dissolved into a hesitant, fearful shuffle into a dark corridor where death waited around the bend. It demonstrated that the most effective defense was not always thicker walls but smarter design. This clever manipulation of space directed the enemy's movement, controlled the pace of the assault, and turned their own strength into a fatal weakness. From these cunning passages designed to confuse and kill, we must now ascend to the castle's highest and most secure point, where final stands were made. That final redoubt was the castle's ultimate insurance policy. Rising high above the inner courtyard, the keep, or donjon, was the fortress within the fortress. This was not merely the Lord's grand residence, it was the garrison's last stand, a symbol of power so absolute it was designed to hold out long after the outer walls had been lost. Imagine the outer bailey is overrun, the enemy floods the courtyard, but the fight is not over. The defenders fall back, pulling the massive doors of the keep shut behind them. Inside, they are prepared for a siege that could last for months. Deep in its foundations, a well-ensured fresh water supply. Vast storerooms were packed with salted meat, grain, and ale. The ground floor, often windowless, served as a secure armory and storeroom, while the great hall above was the command center and living quarters. The entire structure was a self-sufficient universe, a vertical stronghold designed for survival. Its design was a lesson in overcoming past failures. Early rectangular keeps, like the famous White Tower of London, had a critical weakness. Their square corners created blind spots and were vulnerable to mining, where attackers would tunnel underneath to collapse a section of the wall. The solution was a shift in geometry. Builders began constructing cylindrical or polygonal keeps. A round tower had no corners to target. It deflected siege engine stones and made mining far more difficult, as the curved walls distributed weight and stress more evenly. The keep was the ultimate expression of defense in depth, proving that a castle was not a single wall to be breached, but a series of ever more formidable obstacles. Its very existence was a psychological blow to any attacker, a declaration that taking the outer walls was only the beginning of the real battle. And while the keep was a formidable final sanctuary, its strength was entirely dependent on the ground it stood upon, a truth that led builders to look downward, to the very earth beneath their feet. That man-made mountain was the ultimate expression of early medieval power. The motte was not just a hill, it was the foundational statement of the entire castle complex. Before the first stone of a keep was ever laid, armies of laborers would move literal mountains of earth, piling it high into a steep, flat-topped mound. This was not random dirt, it was a carefully engineered structure, its core often reinforced with layers of clay and stone rubble for stability. The resulting slope was intentionally daunting, a steep, slippery gradient designed to break the spirit and the formation of any attacking force. Imagine soldiers struggling up that incline, their heavy armor becoming a burden, their shields held high but leaving their bodies exposed, all while defenders above hurled down rocks and shot arrows with impunity. The motte's genius was its simplicity. It leveraged gravity as a primary defender. Even if an enemy siege engine managed to land a projectile on the earthen slope, the impact was often absorbed with a dull thud, unlike the shattering effect it would have on a stone wall. This earthen pedestal lifted the castle's heart, the keep, high above the fray, granting its defenders an unobstructed view for miles and turning the approach into a deadly uphill battle. It physically and symbolically elevated the lord's authority, making his home the most defensible point in the landscape. While the motte protected the lord and his family, the sprawling enclosure at its base, the bailey, safeguarded everything else that made his rule possible. That bailey was the castle's bustling, beating heart. This enclosed courtyard, defended by its own formidable wall, was far more than just an empty space between the motte and the outer defenses. It was a self-contained village, a vibrant hub of activity that housed everything required for a community to endure a siege that could last for years. Within its protective embrace, you would find the barracks for the soldiers, the stables for the vital warhorses, the forges where blacksmiths repaired weapons and armor, the workshops of carpenters and fletchers, and the chapel for spiritual solace. It was a space of organized chaos where the sounds of industry and daily life proved the castle's resilience, but the bailey's role was deeply strategic. It provided a large, secure mustering area where troops could assemble quickly to respond to a breach, and its open ground offered a safe corral for livestock, the walking larder that sustained the garrison. The true genius of this design emerged in castles with multiple baileys, also known as wards. Each bailey was a separate, defensible enclosure. If attackers overwhelmed the outer bailey, defenders could simply fall back, closing the heavy gates behind them and retreating to the next inner ward. This turned the entire castle complex into a series of sequential choke points, forcing the enemy to fight for every inch of ground, bleeding their strength and morale with each costly advance. Life within these inner wards could continue with a semblance of normality, which was absolutely crucial for the defenders' spirit and endurance over the long months of a siege. The bailey transformed the castle from a mere stronghold into a living, breathing organism capable of sustaining itself indefinitely. This brilliant concept of layered, compartmentalized spaces reaches its absolute peak in our next revolutionary technique. This design philosophy reached its absolute peak with the Concentric castle, a fortress of layered walls that presented an almost unsolvable tactical puzzle. Here, the castle was not one barrier, but two or more complete, independent rings of defense, one nestled inside the other like a set of stone nesting dolls. The outer wall stood formidable in its own right, but the inner wall was always built even higher. This seemingly simple height difference was the key to the entire system's lethal efficiency. It allowed defenders on the higher inner wall to fire their arrows and crossbows clear over the heads of their comrades on the outer wall. An enemy army that miraculously breached the first gate and swarmed into the space between the walls did not find victory. They found themselves trapped in the most terrifying of positions, a wide open killing ground. They were now caught in a devastating crossfire, with missiles raining down from the outer wall in front of them, and a much heavier, more concentrated storm of projectiles plunging down from the higher inner wall behind them. There was no cover, no safe angle, no respite. This concept, known as defense in depth, meant that the castle's strength grew as the enemy advanced, making every hard-won gain a step into a more lethal trap. The unfinished masterpiece of Beaumaris Castle in Wales stands as a perfect example of this ideal. Its symmetrical rings of walls and towers designed to work in flawless, murderous harmony. It was a symphony of stone, each defensive element playing its part in a chorus of destruction. Yet, even these magnificent walls had a hidden vulnerability, a threat that came not from above, but from below the ground. The ground beneath a castle could betray its mighty walls. While defenders manned the battlements, a hidden war was often being fought in the darkness below their feet. Attackers would frequently try to dig tunnels, known as mines, to reach the foundations of the walls. Once there, they would hollow out a large chamber, support it with wooden props, and then set it ablaze. The fire would consume the supports, causing the chamber to collapse and bringing a section of the wall crashing down in a cloud of dust and rubble. It was a silent, insidious threat that could undo years of stonework in a single, fiery instant. The defenders' answer to this subterranean danger was the Countermine Gallery. This was a desperate race against time and sound. Guards would place their ears against the ground or on drums of water, listening intently for the faint, telltale scrape and thud of enemy picks. Once they pinpointed the direction of the dig, their own miners would begin carving a tunnel straight toward the threat. These countermine galleries were scenes of pure, claustrophobic horror, narrow passages where men choked on dust and fought in utter blackness. Clashes were not between knights, but between sappers and miners, men armed with picks, knives, and shovels in a frantic, close-quarters melee. Sometimes the defenders would not even engage the enemy directly. They would simply break into the enemy tunnel and collapse it, burying the attackers alive. Or if the mine was near a water source, they might deliberately flood the entire passage. A successful countermine was a devastating psychological blow. It destroyed the enemy's most skilled workers and their most promising avenue of attack, often forcing a siege to end in frustration. While miners fought their shadowy war underground, the castle above had to withstand a relentless storm from the sky, a barrage of stones and missiles that demanded a different kind of resilience. Those temporary wooden galleries turned the castle into a predatory beast. Hoardings, also known as Bratises, were essentially armored balconies that jutted out from the top of the stone walls, cloaking the fortress in a shell of timber. While Machicolations were fixed in stone, hoardings were a dynamic response to imminent danger, built in a flurry of activity when a siege was announced. Their construction was straightforward. Heavy wooden beams were slotted through gaps in the masonry just below the wallwalk, creating a sturdy frame that was then floored and walled with thick planks. This process gave the castle a new, aggressive profile almost overnight. From the safety of these enclosed boxes, defenders gained an unprecedented advantage. They could now stand directly over the attackers swarming at the base of the wall, a zone that was previously a dangerous blind spot. Through murder holes in the floor, they could pour boiling water, hot sand, or heavy stones straight down onto the heads of those trying to scale the walls or sap the foundations. Meanwhile, archers and crossbowmen used narrow slits in the front panels to fire outward and downward with near total impunity. sheltered from return fire by the wooden walls and the overhanging roof. The name hoarding comes from the Old French word houard, meaning a temporary scaffold, but their effect on an assault was brutally permanent. They represented a brilliant flexibility in medieval warfare, proving that a castle's defense was not just its static stone, but its ability to adapt and project its power outward. And just as these wooden structures shielded the men, the stone battlements themselves evolved to offer even more sophisticated protection, leading to the development of a permanent roof over the defender's head. The keep's greatest weakness was its own foundation. To solve this, builders wrapped the mighty tower in a stone skirt known as the Chemise. This was a low, thick wall that encircled the base of the keep, creating a narrow, protected corridor between the new wall and the old tower. Think of it as a sacrificial outer skin, a loyal bodyguard that took the first blows. When a siege engine launched a massive stone, it would strike this outer chemise wall first. The impact might scar the surface, but the inner keep remained untouched and secure. More importantly, this outer wall created a deadly no-man's land for enemy miners. To reach the keep's foundation, they now had to tunnel under the chemise first, a much longer and more dangerous operation that gave defenders ample time to detect the threat and launch a countermine from within the safety of the main tower. The defensive synergy was brilliant. Soldiers patrolling the wall walk atop the chemise could protect the base of the keep from direct assault, raining down projectiles on anyone who got too close. Meanwhile, archers stationed high in the keep itself could fire their arrows clear over the heads of their own comrades on the chemise, creating two distinct and overlapping tiers of fire that made the entire area around the tower a lethal arena. This was a remarkably cost-effective innovation. Instead of building an entirely new outer Bailey wall, a lord could dramatically strengthen his castle's heart with this single, intelligent addition. The chemise proved that sometimes the best defense was not a taller wall, but a smarter, secondary one. This same principle of a protective outer layer was ingeniously adapted to defend the castle's other critical vulnerability, the gateway itself. That raised drawbridge created an island of stone, but the men inside still needed to see their enemy. A small, heavily fortified projection above the gate provided the answer, the Barbican's watchful eye. This was the spy turret, a tiny, secure room built directly over the entrance passage. From its narrow arrow slits, guards could observe anyone approaching the gate, assessing their numbers and intentions without exposing themselves to danger. It was the castle's first and most critical line of visual intelligence, allowing the garrison to prepare for a friendly merchant caravan or sound the alarm for a hostile army. The spy turret was a perfect example of how medieval architects thought in layers. Every action, even the simple act of looking, was protected by stone and design. This constant, hidden surveillance made the approach to the gate a psychological test, where an army was always being watched but could never see the watchers. It turned the final approach into a stage, with the attackers as the unwilling players in a drama whose ending was already written by the defenders. The gateway's decorative stonework could hide a truly gruesome secret. Above the main entrance, small, seemingly innocent holes were carved into the masonry, often mistaken for simple drains or aesthetic touches. These were the oilets or oil holes, and their purpose was singular and horrifying. When attackers massed at the gate, swinging a battering ram against the heavy oak doors, defenders above would pour cauldrons of boiling oil or thick, sticky pitch directly through these openings. The effect was catastrophic. Hot oil was a nightmare for armored soldiers. It would cascade over helmets and breastplates, finding its way through the tiny gaps at the neck and joints, searing the skin beneath and causing excruciating wounds that were almost impossible to treat. Even more feared was quicklime, a white powder that, when it mixed with the sweat on a man's face or the water used to douse fires, would create a violent chemical reaction. It would boil and sputter, releasing toxic fumes that blinded the eyes and seared the lungs, turning the crowded space before the gate into a suffocating hellscape. This was psychological warfare carved in stone. The oilets ensured that the castle's final barrier was not just a physical obstacle, but a test of sheer human endurance against unimaginable agony. To stand beneath that archway was to accept the risk of a death more terrible than any arrow or sword could deliver. After such an ordeal, any survivors who pushed forward would then be channeled into a space designed to finish what the oilets had started. That open courtyard was a carefully crafted illusion of victory. When attackers finally shattered the outer gate and poured into the inner bailey, they did not find the castle's heart, but its stomach, a space designed to consume them. This was the killing ground, a wide area deliberately kept empty and surrounded by the castle's highest inner walls. Having fought so hard to break through, the besiegers now discovered their triumph was a trap. Their numbers, once their greatest asset, became their greatest liability. Hundreds of men were suddenly channeled into a confined space with no cover, their formations dissolving into a chaotic, densely packed crowd. From the towering inner walls on every side, a storm of death descended. Archers, crossbowmen, and even men hurling rocks could not miss. They fired downward into a sea of targets, their aim guided by the simple law of gravity. Every arrow, every bolt found a mark. The killing ground was the ultimate expression of the castle's funneling strategy, where every previous feature, from the bent entrance to the Barbican, had worked in concert to herd the enemy into this final, fatal arena. It was defensive warfare executed to perfection, transforming a successful breach into the attacker's most catastrophic and demoralizing defeat. To ensure that defenders could move swiftly between these lethal inner spaces while still hindering an enemy's advance, architects devised a staircase that was as clever as it was simple. A spiral staircase was a trap disguised as a passageway. Its clockwise ascent was a deliberate and brilliant piece of psychological manipulation, turning the simple act of climbing stairs into a life or death struggle for any attacker. This design exploited a fundamental fact of medieval combat. Nearly every fighting man was right-handed. As an invader charged up the stairs, his sword arm, his right arm, would be pinned against the tight, central column of the staircase, the newel post. He could not swing his weapon in a wide, powerful arc. He was reduced to clumsy, ineffective jabs. But for the defender standing a few steps above him, the situation was perfectly reversed. The defender descending the stairs had his own right arm, his sword arm, positioned on the outside of the curve, granting him complete freedom of movement. He could deliver powerful, sweeping blows downward, using gravity and position to his absolute advantage. The staircase itself became a collaborator in the defense. The steps were often deliberately cut to uneven heights, a treacherous detail known as a trip step. In the heat of battle, an armored man rushing upward would never see this coming. His foot would catch on a suddenly taller step, breaking his rhythm and leaving him off balance and vulnerable for a crucial second. This was ergonomic warfare at its most cunning, a feature used every day in peace that transformed instantly into a brutal gauntlet during a siege. It proved that in a well-designed castle, there was no such thing as a neutral space. Every corridor, every doorway, and every step was engineered to give the defender an edge. And just as the staircase controlled the vertical movement of people, the castle had to control an even more unpredictable and destructive force, the ever-present danger of fire. Stone ceilings were a fortress's silent shield against its greatest terror. fire could undo years of construction in a single hungry blaze, turning a wooden roof into a collapsing inferno. The solution was found in the graceful arches of stone vaulting, a technique that replaced flammable timber beams with interlocking blocks of masonry. This was not merely an architectural choice, it was a profound defensive calculation. In the Great Hall, the chapel, or the crucial gatehouse, a stone vault formed an impassable barrier to flames. Fire arrows loosed over the walls would strike and sputter out, their threat neutralized. Even the terrifying substance known as Greek fire, a sticky liquid that burned on water, could not consume a ceiling made of rock. Beyond its immunity to fire, the vault provided immense structural strength. A heavy stone launched from a trebuchet that crashed through the outer defenses might slam onto the roof of the Great Hall, but instead of splintering wood and raining destruction on the people below, it would meet a solid, unyielding surface. The impact would send a shudder through the castle, but the vault would hold, protecting the vital command centers and the morale of everyone inside. This was passive defense at its most elegant, a commitment to endurance that ensured the castle's heart would keep beating through the storm of any siege. While the stone vault safeguarded the structure from burning, the people within those walls depended on a more fundamental resource, a secure and private water supply. A deep, dark shaft provided the one resource no army could conquer. The protected well was the castle's silent, beating heart, a secret weapon more vital than any sword or siege engine. Without it, the grandest fortress became a stone coffin, its defenders doomed to a slow, agonizing death by thirst within a matter of days. This is why the well was always situated in the most secure location imaginable, deep within the inner bailey, or even better, carved directly into the foundation of the keep itself. Access was strictly controlled, often through a heavily guarded door or a narrow passage, ensuring that no enemy agent could ever hope to tamper with the water supply. The shaft itself was a marvel of engineering, meticulously lined with stone to prevent cave-ins, and just as importantly, to stop anyone from poisoning the water from above. Imagine the desperation of an attacking army, watching from a distance as the castle's banners still flew after months of encirclement. They knew that deep within those walls, the defenders were drawing cool, fresh water from a source they could not reach. This single feature transformed a siege from a dramatic assault into a grueling war of attrition. The besiegers, camped in muddy, disease-ridden fields with limited supplies, would often starve or sicken long before the well-protected garrison even began to feel the pinch. With their thirst forever quenched, the castle's inhabitants then faced a different kind of survival challenge, one that required an equally clever solution to manage what they left behind. A castle's latrine was a masterclass in practical design. These small, projecting rooms, known as garderobes, were far more than just primitive toilets. Built into the thickness of the outer walls, they featured a simple stone seat with a long, vertical chute that dropped straight down into the moat or a deep-dug cesspit below. This direct disposal system was a crucial innovation for sanitation, especially when a castle was packed with hundreds of people during a siege. While the primary purpose was hygiene, the design offered a subtle defensive bonus. The chutes were deliberately narrow, slick, and sheer, making it utterly impossible for even the most determined spy or assassin to use them as a secret entrance. And in moments of absolute desperation, defenders were known to use these chutes to pour boiling water, hot sand, or simply the accumulated waste of the garrison down upon the heads of attackers attempting to scale the walls directly below. But the true strategic genius of the garderobe was its role in preserving the garrison itself. In a confined space, disease was a silent, invisible army that could decimate a fortress from within. Dysentery and typhoid, born from poor sanitation, could kill more soldiers than any volley of arrows. By efficiently managing waste and keeping the living quarters relatively clean, the humble garderobe fought a constant, unseen battle against illness. This understanding that a healthy soldier was a capable soldier reveals the holistic thinking of medieval architects. They knew a castle's strength was not just in its walls, but in the physical well-being of the men who stood upon them. And those men required immense strength, drawn from a source of power that was both economic and military. That secret door was the castle's ultimate ace in the hole. Tucked away in a shadowy corner of the curtain wall, often concealed by a fold in the landscape or disguised by overgrown ivy, the postern gate was a masterpiece of tactical deception. It was never meant for grand entrances or ceremonial processions. This small, heavily fortified doorway existed for one purpose: to break the suffocating grip of a siege. When an enemy army had the main gate completely blockaded and every visible approach under watch, the defenders could still strike. Under the cover of darkness or a heavy fog, a small, hand-picked force of knights would slip out through the postern. They would move like ghosts, their mission to launch a devastating raid on the besiegers' own camp. Their goal was not to win the war in a single night, but to shatter the enemy's morale. They would set fire to siege engines, kill valuable horses, and sow chaos before melting back into the night and returning to their hidden door. Beyond these daring sorties, the postern was a vital lifeline. A swift runner could use it to carry a desperate plea for reinforcements to a nearby ally. Or, if all hope was lost and the walls were about to be breached, it offered the garrison a final, desperate path of escape to fight another day. The postern gate transformed a passive, besieged fortress into an active, unpredictable opponent. It ensured the defenders were never truly trapped, always holding the power to reach beyond their walls and seize the initiative. To coordinate these complex maneuvers across the vast castle complex, from the main gatehouse to the hidden postern, a simple but brilliant communication system was needed. A single flame on a distant hilltop could mobilize an entire kingdom. This was the power of the beacon and signal system, the nervous system that connected a realm's scattered defenses. When watchmen on the coast spotted enemy sails, they did not send a lone rider on a desperate, days-long journey. Instead, they lit a massive, prearranged fire atop a designated beacon hill. The moment the next castle in the chain saw that flickering light against the night sky, its own fire would roar to life, a relay of urgency that raced across the countryside faster than any horse. A message of imminent invasion could travel from the shore to the capital in a handful of hours, turning a surprise attack into an anticipated invasion and allowing royal armies to muster and march to the threatened border with stunning speed. Within the castle walls, this need for instant communication was just as critical. A castle was a vast, noisy place, and a commander shouting orders from the keep could never be heard at the gatehouse. So they developed a precise language of sound and sight. Specific sequences of horn blasts became unmistakable commands. 2 long notes might signal a general alert, sending every soldier to their posts, while 3 short, sharp blasts could mean the enemy was attempting to scale the western curtain wall. From the highest tower, a system of colored flags or banners would fly, their patterns visible across the entire complex. A red flag raised over the inner bailey could tell the captain of the guard to commit his reserves to a counterattack at the postern gate, all without a single runner risking the arrow-swept courtyard. This internal coordination turned a garrison of hundreds into a single, responsive organism. The entire defensive strategy, from the concentric walls to the killing grounds, depended on this flawless flow of information. A commander who knew where the enemy was striking could move his limited manpower like a master chess player, plugging gaps and reinforcing strong points faster than the attackers could adapt. A well-informed garrison could make a small force feel immense, while a blind and deaf one, for all its stone walls, was already half defeated. This intricate web of communication demonstrates that the castle's true strength was not just in its stone, but in its connections, a lesson that would ultimately extend to the final and most encompassing layer of its defense, the very land it stood upon. That final protective slope was the castle's ultimate killing field. Known as the Glacis, this was a broad, barren earthwork that sloped gently upward from the outer edge of the moat. Its design was brutally simple and devastatingly effective. Every tree, every bush, every scrap of cover was stripped away, leaving a perfectly open, manicured lawn of hard-packed earth. An advancing soldier found no shadow to hide in, no rock to crouch behind, no undulation in the ground to offer a moment's respite. He was a lone figure on a vast, empty stage, and the audience was the castle's entire garrison, all watching from the wings. The Glacis forced an army to run a gauntlet in plain sight, exposed to defensive fire for hundreds of yards before they even reached the main ditch. The gentle upward slope was a subtle but powerful weapon. It robbed an infantry charge of its momentum, turning a sprint into a trudging, exhausting climb. For the crews pushing massive, wheeled siege towers or trebuchets, it was an absolute nightmare, a grueling slog that slowed their most powerful weapons to a crawl. This was the principle of the killing zone perfected, extending the castle's lethal reach far beyond its stone walls. The Glacis ensured that the ground itself fought for the defenders, making the final approach the most dangerous part of the entire assault. This careful shaping of the landscape reveals the ultimate truth of medieval fortification, that a castle's greatest defense was not just its walls, but the ground upon which it was built. The ground upon which a castle stood was its first and most formidable defense. This 29th technique, strategic siting, was the ultimate act of foresight, a decision made not with tools and mortar, but with maps and a deep understanding of the land. Long before the first foundation stone was laid, master builders sought out locations where nature itself would fight their battles for them. They chose dizzying hilltops, forcing an enemy to exhaust himself in a grueling ascent before even facing a man-made wall. They selected jagged, rocky outcrops where the very approach was a treacherous climb over unstable ground. They occupied narrow peninsulas where the sea or a river would wrap around the castle, forming a colossal, unbreachable moat on 2 or even 3 sides. A perfect example is the stunning Mont Saint-Michel in France, a fortress that becomes an island at high tide, its connection to the mainland severed by the relentless sea. This was the art of the force multiplier. A steep slope made siege towers impractical. A river bend prevented a full encirclement and provided a constant supply of fresh water. By leveraging the terrain, the builders conserved the garrison's most precious resource, their energy. Defenders could remain fresh and alert, while the attackers were worn down by the landscape long before the real fighting began. This single choice, the selection of the site, could secure a mountain pass, a vital river crossing, or an entire coastline for 100 years. It proved that the most brilliant defensive strategy sometimes required no construction at all, only the wisdom to recognize the power already present in the world. This foundational principle of working with the land leads us to our 30th and final technique, the revolutionary design philosophy that wove every individual innovation into a single, unstoppable tapestry of defense. This final principle was the master key that unlocked the power of every stone. Defense in depth was not merely a collection of walls, but a revolutionary mindset, a strategic symphony where each of the 30 techniques played its part in a grand, coordinated performance. The besieging army was not fighting a single barrier, they were fighting a campaign. They first had to conquer the Glacis, that barren killing field, then survive the moat, then breach the outer curtain wall, only to be funneled into the slaughter of the Barbican and the Gatehouse. If they miraculously survived that, they then faced the inner Bailey's killing ground, the relentless flanking fire from towers, and the final, desperate climb up the spiral staircase of the keep. Each layer was a self-contained battle, each one costing the attacker more time, more resources, and most importantly, more lives. The genius of this philosophy was its resilience. There was no single point of failure. If the outer wall fell, the defenders simply fell back to the inner ward, shutting the gates behind them and forcing the enemy to start the entire bloody process all over again. The castle was not a shell to be cracked, but an onion to be peeled, with each layer bringing the attacker to tears. This holistic approach transformed defense from a passive event, a simple holding action, into a dynamic, multi-staged war of attrition. It was this intellectual leap, this understanding that a fortress's true strength lay in its layered redundancy, that crowned the medieval castle as the most resilient and psychologically daunting structure of its age. After tracing the evolution of these 30 techniques, from the humble ditch to this grand strategic vision, one cannot help but wonder how these universal principles of survival were adapted and refined across the diverse landscapes of Europe and beyond. A castle in the desert thirsted differently than one in the misty highlands. The universal language of defense was always spoken with a distinct local accent, shaped by the relentless pressures of geography, resources, and enemy tactics. Crusader knights, holding onto their hard-won territories in the Levant, faced a landscape defined by scorching sun and scarce rain. Their castles, like the magnificent crack des Chevaliers, were engineered for endurance beyond battle. They featured vast, intricate systems of cisterns and reservoirs, some capable of holding a year's supply of water, turning the castle itself into an artificial oasis that could outlast any blockade in a parched land. Meanwhile, in the rugged hills of Wales, King Edward I employed a different kind of warfare, one of psychological domination through stone. His great castles, such as Caernarfon and Conwy, were not just strongholds but instruments of conquest. Their revolutionary concentric walls were designed to project overwhelming power over a rebellious population, a constant, visible reminder of English authority stamped permanently onto the Welsh landscape. The very shape of the fortress was adapted to the nature of the threat, which in Italy took a uniquely vertical form. In warring city-states like San Gimignano, rival noble families built upwards, constructing tall, slender tower houses that turned the urban skyline into a stone forest of competing influence. These were fortresses for a different kind of siege, one fought between neighbors in narrow streets. In stark contrast, the Scottish tower house responded to a world of clan rivalries and rugged, isolated terrain. These were compact, multi-story keeps, often built on rocky outcrops, where every floor had a defensive purpose, and the design prioritized a small garrison's ability to withstand a sudden raid from a rival chieftain. From the water-starved deserts to the factional Italian cities, these regional variations prove that medieval military architecture was a brilliantly fluid art. It was a living discipline that listened to the land and adapted to the enemy, a testament to human ingenuity under pressure. The legacy of these stone titans stretches far beyond their own turbulent age, their lessons echoing through centuries of warfare and shaping the very world we live in today. A castle's ruins are not just relics of the past, they are the ghostly blueprints for modern security. The principles forged in those stone laboratories, from the layered redundancy of concentric walls to the psychological intimidation of the gatehouse, did not vanish with the age of knights. They became embedded in the very DNA of military thought. The concept of defense in depth, forcing an enemy to fight through successive, independent strongpoints, is the foundational strategy behind everything from a modern army's echeloned defenses to the multiple firewalls protecting a sensitive computer network today. Even the humble berm, that earthwork slope piled at the base of a wall, finds its direct descendant in the blast walls surrounding forward operating bases, designed to deflect the force of an explosion. The medieval understanding that a fortress must control the ground far beyond its own footprint evolved into the no-man's land of 20th century trench warfare and the cleared perimeters of high-security facilities. These ancient builders understood that the true battlefield was not just the wall, but the mind of the attacker, a lesson in psychological warfare that remains profoundly relevant. So the next time you stand before a crumbling castle wall, look closely. See past the weathered stone to the sheer ingenuity it represents, a symphony of survival composed of 30 brilliant movements. Each technique was a hard-won answer to a deadly question, a testament to humanity's relentless drive to protect what matters. If this journey through the art of defense has sparked your curiosity, we invite you to subscribe for more explorations into the puzzles of our past. And we would love to hear from you. Which of these ancient innovations do you find most remarkable? Share your favorite fortification in the comments below.